we actually end up doing in terms of a project. So they have just given us some estimates at this point. And so the estimated contract with PDT for this phase of the work would be around $136,000. That includes some of the other studies and surveying and analyses that need to be done that were identified as areas that need to be further studied in the facility study. And then their fees for their design work, and then some reimbursable costs that they would have for travel and such. So that is the purpose of the vote tonight, and the board voted to move this direction to go into the capital reserves to try to have the funds to pay for this next phase of the work. So any questions about that?
Okay, so at this point I will read the article, the one that we have, and then entertain a motion. I think how we typically do it is that it's in the affirmative, just so that, not that because you raise it that you're necessarily in favor, but that just so there's no confusion on what the way that we're voting on it.
Do I comment now or ask questions now, or do I wait and wait until the whole thing's ready to the book and you know what you're voting on?
I think once we have the motion made, then we'll entertain the discussion. Article 1, shall the school board be authorized to expend funds in any budget year from the Capital Reserve Fund for the purpose of the continuation of the facility study or the implementation of recommendations from the study? And I'd entertain a motion.
I would motion to adopt Article 1 as read.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a second. Thank you. So at this point, we'd entertain discussion or questions or whatever, however you'd like.
What you just read, I guess is one I
Can you come to the podium?
Can
you come to the podium? Just, we're being filmed. Thank you.
And I'm not sure I heard you correctly. So my name is Judy Sullivan, by the way. I live in Forest Ave. Did I hear you say that that money was to be spent for the plan or to implement the plan?
So you can we'll have him comment on that, but my understanding is for the expend funds for the continuation of the facility study or the implementation of recommendations from the study. So either.
So that's really pretty broad, don't you think? I mean, if I'm voting on something to do one thing and or, I mean, that's a lot of money, number one. You add the two together from what you've already spent, that's almost $200,000 on this study. So you're asking me to say, basically, I feel like I'm saying, yeah, you can spend it however you see fit. You can spend it on the study or you can implement it, use it to implement something in the study. That bothers me. I would say one or the other.
So I can respond to that. So the continuation of the study, when we drafted this warrant article, we spoke with council and they recommended that we structure it this way because we were in kind of an in-between component with the study ending, moving into the design phase. And so when we were at that point, they recommended that we structure the wording this way. Because there may be some elements of the study that would be continued, such as further analysis or surveying that were recommended from the study. There's not enough money in the capital reserve account to do much in terms of implementation at all, except for really, at this point, the design phase of the work. I mean, it leaves us with just over 100,000 left there. So with this particular project, that's our plan. So I don't know if Brian has anything further to explain that.
Yeah, so I mean, it is as it reads. It's the recommendation of the board, which you can obviously agree or not agree with. But the amount of the study is open-ended. It's we have a cap and we're going to manage it not a cap. We have an estimate and we're going to manage it carefully, but it's time and materials. It's possible that there would only be a very money left after this study. We hope not. But at that point, there's going to be, you know, an order of magnitude $100,000 left for capital. Has to go to capital reserves. And in this case, the motion is more specific that it has to go to this one study or a recommendation from that study. So that's the degree of specificity. I think the feeling was just after the study's done, if worst case, it's a little higher than the estimate. That's 5 digits of money, which is certainly real money, but it's money. It's the kind of money that we put into the facilities every year at the district. And at that point, it didn't seem like it was worth calling a whole nother town meeting to just have the authorization to spend that last bit of money on facilities that have been, you know, vetted through a pretty rigorous process of recommendations.
When I was at the last meeting when I was at, which was, I think, on the 13th, the estimate at that time, I thought, for the next phase of the study from the architectural firm was only 60,000 at that time. I thought I saw and read that somewhere, but the next phase was going to come in at that rate, which seemed reasonable if you look at what they did for the first 60,000, that, you know, that you could get the same amount of bang for your buck. That would be fairly good. So that's a difference of over $70,000.
That was, the 60,000 was the phase completed, which was a high-level
plan.
The next phase is getting actually to the level of detailed architectural drawings to the point where we can make a very precise, detailed cost estimate and put out a bond with confidence that we have it. So it's a much, much more detailed process. And the estimate we have is in the neighborhood of 130,000.
And we've had that estimate all along, so the only
I must have
60,000 was
misread that.
from the study phase of the work.
And so this estimate's been in place then. I apologize. I thought I read what I read. Still seems like a lot of money. It's more than half of what you have in reserves.
I don't disagree, but I'm constantly surprised at how much these services cost, and I think it's the cost of architect and engineering services in this economy. So it's they aren't by any means cheap services to obtain, and this is really important phase of the work for us to be able to ensure that what we're taking to the voters when we take something to the voters has been thoroughly studied, planned, designed, and there aren't any surprises that any of us will find after we go out for a bond vote potentially. So it's really important work, and it's important to spend this money now. That also applies, it's carry forward services. So any services we get now for design that we end up actually doing, we've already paid some of that work that would be done in a project. So it's money that's spent now that can help us later not have to spend this kind of money again. So
I was just going to make that same last point. I think it's actually some of the wiser money to spend. It's when we were going to be able to go through the process of saying, you know, this is still just looking like it's how much can we redesign this and get the cost down. And if we, you know, say we took the 130,000 and we said we asked the voters for an authorization to spend 150,000, but we get to the point where we're really still not okay with the costs and we need to do some additional design to get the cost down, we would be at a place where we would actually have to come back and have a whole new process of warrant articles, public meeting, et cetera. So I think that's one of the concerns. I'd rather, you know, I hope it comes in less than 130,000, and certainly I think the board and I think the superintendent intend to manage it as tightly as we can. But when you really get down to this is probably the best money we're spending because it's going to actually let us do a careful vetting of the costs before we take it to a bond. And if we cap that, you know, we will either have to come back for warrant articles, or PDT can say, well, I'm sorry, we just, you know, we don't have the money to do an additional redesign to, you know, look at different cost alternatives. So I think we really need to get this phase right and to manage our money on as best as we can. And I think the board is asking for a little flexibility in doing that.
Any further discussion or questions? Seeing none, then we'll move to a vote. All those in favor of authorizing the school board to expend funds in any budget year from the capital reserve fund for the purpose of the continuation of the facility study or the implementation of recommendations from the study, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Okay, unanimous, it carries. Thank you. That's it.
So we are adjourning the budget meeting at 6:19.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Club, and Katie King is here representing the French Club. She has gone on, she's a senior this year. She is window there of 300 to 400. It usually leans more towards the 300, sometimes less, depending on activities and numbers.